We've all witnessed them. Individuals who radiate absolute certainty about their expertise while demonstrating clear incompetence. The coworker who hijacks meetings with misguided recommendations. The relative who transforms into an authority after consuming a single YouTube video. The social media warrior who challenges genuine professionals with unwavering confidence. What creates this bizarre gap between self-assurance and actual ability? The explanation lies in a captivating psychological phenomenon identified over 20 years ago. In 1999, social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger published revolutionary research that fundamentally altered our comprehension of human cognition. Their investigation revealed a cognitive bias now known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect, a phenomenon explaining why individuals with minimal skills in any domain consistently overestimate their capabilities, while genuine experts tend to undervalue theirs. As Dunning famously observed, the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're a member of the Dunning-Kruger Club. Today we'll explore this psychological mechanism that influences everyone to varying degrees. We'll examine its origins, underlying processes, real-world manifestations, and crucially, how to identify and counteract it within ourselves. The greatest irony of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that those most vulnerable to it are precisely the ones least likely to recognize their susceptibility. If this paradox about not knowing what you don't know is already making you question your own areas of overconfidence, then you're demonstrating the exact kind of intellectual humility that protects against this cognitive bias. Subscribe to Psyphoria Zone and hit that like button to support our exploration of these crucial psychological phenomena that shape human behavior and decision-making in ways most people never recognize. The discovery of this effect originated from an extraordinary bank robbery in 1995. MacArthur Wheeler entered two Pittsburgh banks in broad daylight without any disguise, robbed them, and casually walked out. When police arrested him that evening, Wheeler expressed genuine shock upon learning that surveillance cameras had captured his image. "But I wore the juice," he protested to officers. Wheeler had covered his face with lemon juice, believing it would render him invisible to security cameras based on his understanding that lemon juice functions as invisible ink. This remarkable case captured psychologist David Dunning's attention, who became fascinated by Wheeler's profound misunderstanding combined with complete confidence in his flawed reasoning. This led Dunning to investigate a crucial question. How could someone be so incompetent that they remained unaware of their incompetence? He collaborated with graduate student Justin Kruger to examine this phenomenon systematically. In their groundbreaking study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Dunning and Kruger evaluated participants across humor, grammar, and logical reasoning skills. Following each assessment, participants estimated their performance relative to others. The results were both striking and consistent. Individuals scoring in the bottom quartile dramatically overestimated their performance, believing they outperformed 62% of peers when they actually surpassed only 12%. Meanwhile, top performers consistently underestimated their relative abilities. As Dunning observed, if you're incompetent, you can't know you're incompetent. The skills you need to produce a right answer are exactly the skills you need to recognize what a right answer is. This creates a double burden of incompetence. People not only lack performance skills, but also lack the metacognitive ability to recognize their deficiency. At its foundation, the Dunning-Kruger effect stems from metacognitive deficiency, the failure to accurately assess one's own knowledge and abilities. This metacognitive blind spot creates an illusion of superiority that proves remarkably resistant to contradicting evidence. The effect operates through several psychological mechanisms. First is the unknown unknowns problem. When venturing into unfamiliar territory, we lack awareness of the full scope of required knowledge or skills. We don't know what we don't know. As Dunning explains, the skills you need to produce the right answer are exactly the same skills you need to evaluate if an answer is right. If you lack domain expertise, you also lack the ability to recognize expertise, including its absence in yourself. Second is confirmation bias. Once we form beliefs about our abilities, we selectively attend to supporting information while discounting contradictory evidence. A novice who believes they're skilled will remember successes, attribute failures to external factors, and interpret ambiguous feedback positively. Third is the difficulty in accurately calibrating self-assessment. Even when attempting objectivity, humans struggle to evaluate themselves without reference points. In the absence of clear feedback or comparison, we tend to rate ourselves above average, a phenomenon known as the better-than-average effect or illusory superiority. As philosopher Bertrand Russell astutely noted, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts. This insight captures the essence of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Confidence and competence often demonstrate inverse relationships at the extremes of the knowledge spectrum. While popular culture frequently portrays the Dunning-Kruger effect as a simple inverse relationship between confidence and competence, the actual relationship proves more nuanced. Rather than linear, researchers have identified a characteristic curve mapping the journey from novice to expert. The journey begins at what some call Mount Stupid, the peak of confidence experienced by absolute beginners who have gained just enough knowledge to feel informed but lack awareness of the vast terrain they haven't yet explored. As Mark Twain wisely observed, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." After this initial peak comes the valley of despair, when continued learning reveals the true scope of the domain, causing confidence to plummet. This represents the critical juncture where many abandon their efforts, unable to reconcile their self-image with newly discovered limitations. Those who persevere begin the gradual climb up the slope of enlightenment, where competence and confidence slowly increase together through dedicated practice and learning. They eventually reach the plateau of sustainability, where high competence matches appropriately calibrated confidence. Particularly interesting is how experts often exhibit slight underconfidence relative to their actual abilities. This expert uncertainty stems from their comprehensive understanding of their field's complexity and nuance. They're acutely aware of their knowledge boundaries and the vastness of what remains unknown. As Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman once said, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong." This intellectual humility marks true expertise, contrasting sharply with novice overconfidence. While most experimental evidence for the Dunning-Kruger effect comes from laboratory settings and academic skills, the phenomenon extends far beyond these contexts, permeating virtually every domain of human endeavor. In professional settings, the effect manifests as unskilled and unaware employees who consistently overrate their performance and contribution. One study found that 95% of managers believe they performed in the top 50% of their peer group, a statistical impossibility. This inflated self-assessment often leads to resistance to feedback, limited professional growth, and interpersonal conflicts. In healthcare, the effect can have life-threatening consequences. Medical students with the lowest skill levels often overrate their clinical abilities, potentially leading to dangerous overconfidence in clinical decision-making. One study found that doctors most confident about their diagnoses were not more accurate than peers, but were less likely to consult references or seek second opinions. In politics, the effect helps explain why some of the most vociferous voices on complex policy issues often demonstrate the least nuanced understanding. Those with rudimentary knowledge of economics, climate science, or international relations may express absolute certainty in their positions, while experts in these fields typically acknowledge the limitations and uncertainties inherent in their domains. In our digital age, the Dunning-Kruger effect has found particularly fertile ground. Social media platforms allow individuals with minimal expertise to broadcast opinions to wide audiences with the same apparent authority as established experts. This democratization of voice, while valuable in many ways, has also created what some researchers call an expertise crisis, a flattening of perceived differences between novice and expert opinions. As Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it, one of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong. This captures how the Dunning-Kruger effect operates beyond academic settings, shaping discourse and decision-making across society. The manifestation of the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't uniform across cultures. Research suggests that cultural factors significantly influence how people assess their abilities and how pronounced the effect appears in different societies. In Western, particularly American culture, self-promotion and confidence are highly valued. Children are raised to believe in themselves and their potential, creating fertile ground for ability overestimation. The American ethos of individual achievement and potential may inadvertently amplify the Dunning-Kruger effect by encouraging positive self-assessment regardless of objective performance. By contrast, many East Asian cultures emphasize humility, self-improvement, and awareness of limitations. Studies have found that Japanese students typically rate themselves below average on many dimensions, the opposite of the above-average effect commonly observed in Western samples. This cultural tendency towards self-criticism may actually mitigate the Dunning-Kruger effect by encouraging more conservative self-assessments. Collective versus individualistic societal orientations also impact how the effect manifests. In more collectivist societies where group harmony and interdependence are prioritized, individuals may be more receptive to feedback from others and less likely to maintain inflated self-assessments that contradict group consensus. As Confucius wisely noted, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Cultures that embed this philosophy into their educational and social systems may naturally cultivate the metacognitive awareness that helps prevent the Dunning-Kruger effect from taking hold. However, no culture is immune to the basic cognitive limitations underlying the effect. The fundamental challenge of not knowing what you don't know transcends cultural boundaries, even if its expression varies across different societies. While the Dunning-Kruger effect highlights the dangers of overconfidence, it's important to recognize that confidence itself isn't inherently problematic. In fact, a certain degree of self-belief is essential for motivation, perseverance, and achievement. Confidence becomes problematic when it's drastically misaligned with actual ability. This misalignment can lead to poor decision-making, resistance to learning, and interpersonal conflicts. However, appropriate confidence based on realistic self-assessment can be highly adaptive and contribute to success. Research in performance psychology has consistently shown that optimal performance typically requires moderate confidence levels, enough to motivate action and persistence, but not so much that it prevents recognition of mistakes or areas for improvement. This calibrated confidence represents the sweet spot where self-belief aligns with reality. Interestingly, studies suggest that slightly overestimating one's abilities by a small margin may actually be beneficial in some contexts. This mild positive illusion can increase motivation, help overcome initial challenges, and lead to greater persistence facing setbacks. The key distinction is between slight overconfidence that drives effort versus the dramatic overestimation characteristic of the Dunning-Kruger effect. As psychologist Albert Bandura noted, people who have a sense of self-efficacy bounce back from failures. They approach things in terms of how to handle them rather than worrying about what can go wrong. This healthy confidence differs fundamentally from the unfounded certainty of those caught in the Dunning-Kruger trap. Before we continue, let's pause for a moment and do an experiment together. Think about an area where you feel really confident, maybe cooking, sports, technology, or whatever it might be. Now be honest with yourself. How much of what you think you know have you actually put to the test? Drop a comment below with your area of supposed expertise and tell me, are you 100% sure you're as good as you think you are? Or are you maybe sitting right on top of that Mount Stupid we just talked about? Don't be afraid to be vulnerable here. Admitting our limitations is the first step to becoming truly competent. Who's brave enough to share their overconfidence zone? I want to see who among you has the courage to question their own certainties. Let's get real in the comments. The challenge, then, is not to eliminate confidence, but to cultivate it in proportion to actual ability, to develop what psychologists call epistemic humility alongside self-efficacy. This balanced approach acknowledges both our capabilities and limitations. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of the Dunning-Kruger effect is recognizing it in ourselves. By its very nature, the effect blinds us to our own incompetence, creating a stubborn cognitive blind spot that resists self-awareness. The first step toward breaking free from this cycle is accepting universal vulnerability to this bias. No one, regardless of intelligence or education, is immune to overestimating their abilities in domains where they lack expertise. As intellectual historian Robert Burton writes, the feeling of knowing is not a reliable guide to whether or not you actually know something. Practical strategies for counteracting the effect begin with actively soliciting feedback from others, particularly experts in the relevant domain. External assessment provides the objective perspective that self-assessment often lacks. However, this requires genuine openness to criticism and willingness to temporarily suspend defensive reactions. Deliberate practice with specific focus on areas of weakness can also help align perceived and actual ability. This practice must include clear, immediate feedback on performance to calibrate self-assessment. Without this feedback loop, practice alone may actually reinforce overconfidence rather than correct it. Cultivating metacognitive awareness, thinking about your thinking, serves as another powerful antidote. Regular reflection on the limits of your knowledge and consciously considering alternative perspectives helps develop the habit of questioning initial certainty. As Socrates wisely observed, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Perhaps most challenging but most effective is developing comfort with uncertainty and not knowing. Modern society often rewards quick answers and confident assertions over thoughtful consideration and admission of limitations. Resisting this pressure requires intellectual courage, the willingness to say, "I don't know," or "I'm not sure," when appropriate. As writer and philosopher Aldous Huxley noted, that men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons that history has to teach. Similarly, the most important lesson of the Dunning-Kruger effect may be learning to question our certainty, especially when we feel most confident. Our information ecosystem has undergone radical transformation in recent decades, creating new dimensions to the Dunning-Kruger effect. The internet has democratized access to information, allowing anyone to gain surface-level familiarity with virtually any topic through quick searches. This easy access to information can create an illusion of understanding that amplifies the Dunning-Kruger effect. The structure of social media platforms further compounds the problem by rewarding confident assertions over nuanced expertise. Algorithms tend to promote content that generates engagement, which often means strong, unequivocal statements rather than careful, qualified analyses. This creates an environment where the loudest, most confident voices gain prominence regardless of actual expertise. Filter bubbles and echo chambers exacerbate these tendencies by shielding individuals from contradictory information that might challenge their perceived expertise. When surrounded only by those who share similar perspectives or levels of understanding, there are few opportunities to recognize one's limitations. The sheer volume of information available online also contributes to what researchers call knowledge fragmentation, the acquisition of discrete facts without the conceptual frameworks needed to integrate them meaningfully. This fragmented knowledge creates the sensation of understanding without its substance. As author Tom Nichols writes in The Death of Expertise, the internet lets us contact and interact with many more people than we would normally encounter in our daily lives. But it can also give us the false impression that our views are more widely shared and more correct than they actually are. The solution isn't to abandon digital information sources, but to approach them with greater metacognitive awareness. This includes recognizing that reading an article doesn't make you an expert, understanding the difference between access to information and comprehension of complex systems, and cultivating digital literacy skills that help distinguish between credible and questionable sources. As writer Maria Popova eloquently states, critical thinking without hope is cynicism, but hope without critical thinking is naivety. This balanced approach is essential for navigating the complexities of knowledge acquisition in the digital age. While the Dunning-Kruger effect operates at the individual level, its cumulative impact shapes societies, institutions, and public discourse in profound ways. Understanding these broader implications helps us recognize the effect not just as a psychological curiosity, but as a significant social force. In democratic systems, the effect influences electoral outcomes when voters with limited policy knowledge confidently assess complex proposals based on superficial understanding. This can lead to support for simplistic solutions to multifaceted problems and vulnerability to populist rhetoric that offers certainty in place of nuance. In organizational contexts, the effect can distort hiring and promotion decisions when those with limited competence but high confidence outshine more capable but modest candidates. Over time, this can lead to what researchers call confidence cascades, where entire organizational cultures begin to value and reward displays of certainty over actual performance. In scientific communication and public health, the effect creates resistance to expert guidance when individuals with minimal subject knowledge feel equally qualified to evaluate evidence as those with specialized training. This dynamic has been particularly evident during the COVID-19 pandemic, where confident non-experts often challenge public health recommendations based on limited understanding of epidemiology. The effect also influences educational systems, particularly when students or parents with strong opinions but limited pedagogical knowledge advocate for educational approaches that contradict evidence-based practices. This can undermine educational effectiveness and teacher authority. Philosopher Hannah Arendt's observation becomes particularly relevant. The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. While less dramatic, the erosion of epistemic authority through the Dunning-Kruger effect creates similar vulnerabilities in democratic societies. Addressing these societal implications requires both individual metacognitive development and institutional reforms that better distinguish between confidence and competence, reward intellectual humility alongside demonstrated ability, and create better systems for evaluating and communicating specialized knowledge. If this deep dive into human psychology is blowing your mind like it's blowing mine, smash that like button to help spread awareness about these crucial cognitive biases. And hey, if you're not already part of our community of curious minds, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we're constantly exploring the hidden mechanisms that shape how we think and make decisions. But here's what I really want to know. After everything we've discussed today, what's one area of your life where you think society rewards confidence over actual competence? Maybe it's social media, politics, your workplace, or even dating apps. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights often spark ideas for future videos. Find and tag someone who you think needs to hear about the Dunning-Kruger effect. Let's start some meaningful conversations about intellectual humility. The journey through the Dunning-Kruger effect reveals a fundamental paradox of human knowledge. The more we learn, the more we recognize how much we don't know. As our circle of knowledge expands, so does our perimeter of contact with the unknown. This paradox creates the counterintuitive trajectory we've explored, from the unearned confidence of novices to the calibrated uncertainty of experts. It explains why true mastery is often marked not by absolute certainty, but by comfort with complexity, nuance, and the limits of current understanding. Understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect offers us a powerful lens for self-reflection and intellectual growth. It reminds us that the path to genuine knowledge begins with recognizing our limitations and embracing the discomfort of uncertainty. It encourages us to cultivate both the confidence to act and the humility to learn. As we navigate an increasingly complex world filled with confident voices offering simplified certainties, awareness of this cognitive bias becomes ever more valuable. It helps us distinguish between hollow confidence and earned expertise, both in ourselves and others. Perhaps most importantly, understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect inspires a more compassionate view of human error. When we recognize that overconfidence often stems not from arrogance, but from the very structure of knowledge acquisition, we can approach disagreements with greater patience and intellectual charity. In the words of physicist Richard Feynman, I believe that a scientist looking at non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy. This humility from one of history's greatest scientific minds captures the essence of what the Dunning-Kruger effect teaches us. That wisdom begins not with certainty, but with the recognition of how much we have yet to learn. By embracing this paradox, that knowledge reveals ignorance, that understanding unveils complexity, we open ourselves to deeper learning, more productive discourse, and a more accurate calibration between confidence and competence. In doing so, we take the first step in overcoming the very bias we've been exploring.